Today's podcast is brought to you by Audible.com. Get a free audiobook download and 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/usingyourpower. Over 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or MP3 player. For this episode of the podcast, I'd like to recommend Wild at Heart, Discovering the Secret of a Man's Soul by John Eldredge. Or if you're a woman, you can also check out Captivating, Unveiling the Mystery of a Woman's Soul by John and Stacey Eldredge. This is Using Your Power, and I'm David Wiebe. Joining me is...
Maveen, Kaura.
Hi, Maveen. How's it going?
Yeah, I'm doing good, man. How are you today?
I'm powered up.
Yeah? You know, one of the things I'm really excited about is we got the dogs upstairs to calm down, and they're not walking around and they're not barking anymore. So I think on this recording today, it'll be a really good one. We'll get them in the background.
Don't speak too soon.
Well, that's true.
But yeah, I guess if you've heard those dogs in previous episodes, that's what's going on. You know, I live with 3 other roommates plus 2 dogs, so sometimes they do make a lot of noise, and maybe our mics have picked them up a little bit. If we had one more dynamic mic, I guess that wouldn't happen, but you're using a condenser mic, so that tends to pick up your thoughts.
Well, it does pick up my thoughts. I think that's how they all keep coming out this way, right?
That's
right. The more I look at this microphone, the more I keep speaking, and the more the ideas just keep flowing.
Love it. So what are we talking about today?
Today, you know, we have decided to talk about 10 things that, you know, as in ourselves, as well as our listeners, may have or have learned from their parents.
Such an interesting topic, and I really look forward to talking about this, you know, and it's been good kind of thinking about what I have learned from my parents too, and it brings back memories and brings back thoughts of the past too, so it's a very interesting.
Oh, for sure. And, you know, I think a lot of the things that your parents have taught you and a lot of the things my parents have taught me, and, you know, just the people that are in charge of us when we're growing up, you know, these people help shape us. They help mold us into the people that, you know, they want us to become. But I think also the people they don't want us to become as well. They've definitely helped us mold into that as well.
Yeah, no, that's true. And, you know, our parents did the best they could with what they had. But so often, you know, parents might have certain intentions, and that's why the kids are brought up in a religious household. Like, I kind of had that moment of clarity as well, where I thought, well, you know, in general, in church, you learn good things, and those good things can make you a good person, so to speak. So that might be one of the reasons or motivators why parents would want their kids to grow up in a church.
No, for sure. And I like the fact that you just started on religion first point right into it, eh? We're just going to get into the meat and potatoes of it
all
right
of the
away.
taboos today.
Yeah, well, that's okay, right? I mean, you're right. I mean, one of the things, you know, depending on the household you're being grown up in, and depending on what cultural background you come from, you know, some parents are teaching, you know, different religious factors and cultural items to their kids. Some people are not, right? Some people allowing them some parents are allowing people to just kind of learn, you know, just as they want to, right? But I think it is the choice of the parents to either decide to teach the kids on that or not, right? And I know you made a statement saying, you know, you were born into a family that wanted to teach religion and teach culture and teach, you know, spirituality and maybe help save people through Christianity, right? So if I'm not wrong in that, and there's nothing wrong with that, right? I mean, these are beliefs that they had, and these are strong beliefs they had, right? And there's nothing wrong with it, and they wanted to, at least it feels to me, pass some of that belief system that they felt was good for them and pass those values back on to you.
Yeah, I think you summed it up very, very well there. It's true. You know, that's one of the cool things is it's a family that valued culture. So I grew up in Japan. I got to see the Philippines, got to see Malaysia, Korea, a few of the
North or South Korea?
Seoul, so you know that would obviously be South Korea if I'm not mistaken. I don't know if you can even fly into North Korea randomly.
No, I don't think you can. I think you got to cross from the south, but I have no idea. I've never been to that side of the world, at least the Korea side.
Yeah, and I've really only been in the airport, to be fair.
Got all the culture you ever wanted from the airport.
Yeah, but I guess no. Thinking about that now brings a lot of clarity to me. In the way in which you said culture. Yeah, I think my family did value culture. That's why I did grow up overseas. That's why I did experience some of those things. So that is definitely kind of a cool thing.
No, for sure. And what are some of the things that your parents kind of taught you about when they, they were teaching other people, right? Culture and whatnot. So what are maybe some of the things that you picked up from them about culture and the way they were maybe teaching it, David?
Well, that's a huge, broad question. I think my parent, like, because I was born in Canada, but like we moved over to Japan when I was turning 6, so I was still very young and maybe not picked up on all those kinds of things. It's fair to say like they'd been to Japan before, and my sister was born there, and they'd returned to Canada, and I was born in Canada, and then we moved back to Japan. So they liked Japan, and they liked experiencing different cultures and traveling enough that they would chose to do that again. And who knows, maybe my dad was no longer wanting to be a college professor at a Bible college, and we joked about how much he was making or not making at that time. Very smart guy, has had different degrees, pastoral degrees, and was very book smart that way. But maybe that was part of the decision too, is financially we maybe wouldn't have been able to sustain our lives. But that's an interesting lesson too, right? Because we have so much talk about lifestyle business these days. And so, if you're making $1,000 a month here in Canada, maybe you can't live on that. But if you move to somewhere like Chiang Mai or somewhere cheaper, Davao or something like that, maybe $1,000 a month would go a long way. Maybe not provide a full living, but it would go a lot longer than it would here.
Right, and that's to really say in lots of different parts in the world as well, right? I mean, $1,000 goes a long way in a lot of different countries, right? Especially when you start looking into places like India and maybe inland China. If you start looking at Vietnam and Malaysia and the Philippines and all those little islanders, a lot of the Asian countries, right? You'll see that your dollar does go a lot further, and there's something to be said about living in those countries as well, right? And growing up in those countries, or at least being a visitor when you go to those countries, right? So, I mean, one of the things I took away from my parents, and I know we started talking a little bit about the religion side of you growing up in that side, and you learned kind of from them and how I think important it was to kind of teach it to other people, but also be grounded in who you are as a religious person as well, right? And not just pushing it down everybody's throat, but I believe your parents are probably out there really just kind of showing people what it's about, right? And kind of letting them make their own choices. I'm hoping, there's no gun to people's heads and saying, you got to believe this, right? So
no, I think that is a very fair point. Yeah, I think it maybe taught myself, my sister, what evangelism looked like, or at least what evangelism looked like from the perspective of my parents.
Right. And I think that's important, right? That's the perspective of your parents. And I mean, every different teacher you look out there is evangelizing and teaching in slightly different ways, right?
Yes.
So, I mean, there's how many different churches all around the world, and each one of them have a leader head in them, right? I don't care if it's a church or if it's a temple, a synagogue. I don't know. It doesn't matter what
the
cultural...
Vatican, the pastor, the priest.
Doesn't matter, right? I mean, everybody has somebody there teaching values that they deem to be important to that congregation, right? So I think that's important to look at as well when you're starting to look at going to different temples and churches and whatnot.
Yep, definitely. So should we get into some of those points that we've thought about when it comes to things we've learned from our parents? I mean, that was kind of one of mine in a way, talking about what happened on an international level, but I have some other ones that I've prepared. So
absolutely. I can start if you don't mind. And this kind of goes along with what we were just chatting about right now. One of the things that when I grew up, my parents, I grew up in a Hindu household, right? Learning about all the different gods and all the different rituals and all the different cultural things that go with the culture and the way the people are and whatnot. I learned about it, but it was never pushed down my throat by my parents. They really allowed myself and my sister as well to make those decisions. I mean, they taught us kind of the practices that they enjoyed. Now, they didn't push us into doing them. You know, I still to this day don't do every single different religious practice my dad does, is because it's not who I am as a person. It's not how I feel I can connect to my spiritual side. That's the way he feels he connects. My mom has her own different practices, and that's how she feels she can connect. I know my sister has her own different practices, and because we were allowed to be free in our thought process on how we, you know, determine our path to be, right? And I think that was really refreshing. So that's one of the things I really learned from my parents, was to make my own decisions on what I felt was important for me for my own spiritual journey, right? One of the things I know we did when I was 24 years old, so about 14 years ago now, we took a full family trip. You know, all four of us went overseas at the time to India, because my dad really wanted to show us the idea of where they came from and some of the history, and kind of, that's one of the things he really enjoys, is the history side of things and the religious history side of things, and he really wanted to, I think, share that with us at that time, right? So I mean, we went there and I learned about all my different family and all the different people in it, and how they did their spiritual practice, and I learned about the culture a lot more. I mean, when you're immersed in any culture, like when you were in Japan, right, David, you kind of got used to what the culture was like. You started becoming a part of that culture by, your mannerisms would become similar to the mannerisms that people of that culture would have. You know, the way you dress, the way you use your slang, you start being that. So, just kind of being immersed in that culture was huge. Started learning a lot about the religious history as well in India, because I mean, it does have one of the oldest religions on the planet that come from that region, and just really being able to witness and see how millions of people have their spiritual practice, right? And how it was very different, than each other's. It wasn't all the same necessarily. A lot of it had a lot of similarities in it, but there's still a lot of people that were doing it a little bit different, right? I mean, we had the opportunity to go to different religious sites like the Ganga River and stuff, the Holy River in India, and my dad, I think, really wanted to show us what that really meant. And it really allowed us, I think, me and my sister, to really appreciate what we have here in Canada versus what maybe people have in India now. I'm not saying that in an egotistical way at all, because it really allowed me to appreciate that people who have nothing still are happier than people who have something. It really blew my mind to see the vast differences of the way I thought I used to live to the way I live my life now, and have more appreciation for the culture I come from. And it allows me actually to appreciate all the different cultures that I'm surrounded by too.
It's really great. And I'm going to tie it in with my point on beliefs as well, because it's really kind of close to what you said. I think, I grew up in a non-denominational, particular denomination of Christianity called the Church of God. So really up until my 20s, probably mid or late 20s, I was in the Church of God almost every Sunday. And I'd say it's like a fairly conservative but not fundamentalist branch of Christianity, because many denominations, they have their quirks, they have their differences, and even within, like you could say, like Lutheran churches, even within Lutheran churches, you have everything from very like traditional religious ceremonies all the way over to like just easygoing people. They're like, yeah, I come to church on Sunday and I'm a Christian on Sunday. And like, that's really all they commit to or know. And I'm not judging any of that, because I'm not talking about the Christian values or the Christian principles that were instilled in me. I'm just talking about the importance of having beliefs. Network marketing, something they always said was, if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything. And it really is, that is really how it works. So to me, it's not so much about the religion that I was brought up with, or even the fact that my parents taught me spirituality. I'm not sure that they did, but they did teach me the importance of beliefs and standing on something. Like the whole Christian thing is multi-generational. My grandparents were clearly Christians as well, and believing Christians in that. So like I have my own spiritual path and I'm walking it, and I'm not any less or any more believing of the Christian faith. I guess I've just kind of seen expanded viewpoint from where I stand right now versus where I was, and that expanded viewpoint helps me to see so much more of how the world works in a way.
Right. And I think this is a great topic that we can actually hit on later down the road. The topic of religion is a topic I know me and you've had extensive conversations on, and it's something I'd love to bring to the table here. But, we'll try to keep it a little bit less open. We'll try to keep it a little generic right now, and maybe create a little suspense for the listeners for the next couple episodes.
Yeah, and keep the shouting match till later.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we'll keep that. And that's where I think a lot of people go to war too, right? So over
it's
it.
True.
So, we're in the same room here, so we'll definitely be civil. But, it is true, right? I mean, even what you just said right now, you're on your own spiritual path. And then you're right. And that's one of the things my parents, pushed me and my sister to do, right? And they don't get really deep into religion. I know my dad tries to tell us stuff about it, and I'll listen to what he has to say. And, I appreciate it. And they've watched all these religious movies and all these different dramas and TV shows. And within that, there is some good within it as well, right? I mean, it's being grounded. It's like reading a book. Instead of reading it, you're watching something visually about what that book was saying, right? So there's just so many different ways to take in that information, about God or religion. But one of the things I did also get from my parents with religion aspect as well is to respect other people's religions and viewpoints, right? Because not everybody is religious, and there are atheists out there that that say there is no God, and there's people out there that say science is God, or there's, what I mean, kind of the science is king, there is no such thing as God either. So I respect both sides of the argument. I will listen to both sides of the argument, and in some parts of me I probably believe in both sides of the argument, right? I mean, if you look clearly enough, you could probably see that, but I think that's something we should definitely save for a later topic before we get really deep into this and we stop calling this topic 10 things I learned from my parents.
And I will say this, it's actually a very fascinating story. My dad, like when we moved to Japan, we were part of a particular church. So my dad, before he passed on, he kind of had membership in that church too. That can mean different things. I have no idea because I was still very young, but I'm not sure exactly what that membership embodied. But baptism is something that occurs in many different faiths. In Christianity, it does. Some would even say it's biblical, and by that I mean like it's in the Bible, it's true, it's something we adhere to, or a principle or a ceremony that we observe. So what he hosted a weekly like Bible study group, and there was a lady that wanted to be baptized. Now the church came back to him and said, if you baptize her, we have to excommunicate you, like cut you off from the church. So he had a decision to make about whether or not to go ahead and baptize that lady, and ultimately his decision was yes, he was going to do it. But again, keeping in mind the cultural context, like it's very different culture in Japan than here. Here, baptism is something that probably occurs, multiple times a year, if not every day of the year, depending on the church and your faith. Some people probably get baptized multiple times. Multipized. That's an interesting.
That's a new word for our dictionary too.
Yeah, that's a new word. Some people do full immersion. Some people do sprinkling. Whatever. There's just different thoughts and different ideas on it. But in the case of my dad, it had certain repercussions when he went ahead with it.
Right. And just to kind of on that too, right? I mean, you're right. I mean, we learned a lot from our parents. And I think, like I said earlier, like a lot of the things that they did help shape who we are today, right?
Yes.
Either in following the same path or following the exact opposite path, right? It's a decision we both make, and I think even our listeners make based on how their parents and their belief system was, right? I know I've met a lot of people who have grown up Catholic and not really. I understand what the Catholic faith is about and have changed over Christianity, right? After they've kind of learned a little bit more about Christianity. And to me, I always felt that they were very similar, but I guess they felt that there were still enough differences to change over and be a Christian versus a Catholic, right? So, I mean, throughout cultural differences, you'll see that people will change, right? And these are things that I learned from my parents as well, because, growing up in a Hindu household, I have seen my dad, reading the Bible. I've seen my dad reading books on Buddhism and stuff, and these are things that I've also picked up on books on Buddhism and I've picked up the Bible and I've read that too, because in order for me to understand what the whole argument is about or understand what God is about, then I need to understand it from all sides, right? I know a lot of people say, well, no, just pick up the one book and that should be your faith, but I think on a planet with 7 billion people, there's really, one of the things my parents taught me was don't just isolate your mind, and think in a box. Allow yourself to grow, right? Now they may not, they may not fully believe that themselves. I think my dad's a little bit more believing of that than my mom is sometimes, but I think that's just their personality or differences, right? Just the way they grew up in their households and how they've also become too, right? But the common thread they share is they haven't pushed, the religion down our throats the way that you've seen like some of the hardcore people do, right? They've asked us to join the different ceremonies, and and sometimes there is a great reason to do it because there is a nice spiritual side of it, feeling connected, and I've gone to different churches in Calgary as well, right? Just because I was at one point looking for ways to how could I understand God, right? Because I don't understand some of the different languages out there. It's like Sanskrit. I don't understand it. It's not something that I'm very familiar with. I didn't grow up with it, but I can understand English. And when I went to churches, they were talking in English, right? So plain language I can understand. And what I would do is just really substitute words in my mind, right? I can substitute the word Jesus for God. I can understand. I can substitute it for principles. I can substitute the name for anything. At that point, that's not why I was there. I wasn't there to learn about Jesus, although I did learn about who he was. But it also allowed me to expand my mind and really understand my own culture that I come from in a positive way, right?
Yeah, and similarly, like I've studied Tao Te Ching, I've looked into law of attraction, Kabbalahism, even things, multiple different religious or philosophical beliefs, and I would say that I've more often than not benefited from looking into things outside of what may have been my scope before than not exploring at all. So I agree. I like that. It's not a teaching that I learned from my parents, but something you learned from your parents, which is cool.
Yeah, man. And I think, and this is the whole idea, right? The reason I wanted to bring up this idea was because, there's things that I can learn from your parents by having this conversation. There's these things that you can learn from my parents, right? So the idea is to help our listeners, learn from the principles of through conversation, not only from our parents, but have these conversations with your own spouse and say, hey, what are the 5 things that you learned from your mom and dad? I'll tell you 5 things I learned from my mom and dad or stepdad or whatever. And then they can have those conversations as well, right? And these are the conversations that we're encouraging. Like our last episode, we're talking about 10 to 15 hours of time is on social media. Take some of that time away from social media and explore these type of questions, because that's a huge thing.
Love it. Yeah, and maybe just think about what were the positives from your parents. Like we so often fight with them or think negatively of them, but maybe using your power in a different way by thinking about what was it that was taught to me that was positive and actually made me the person I am today in a good way.
That's right. And kind of a nice transition to what you're saying. One of the things, and you probably had the same conversation, right? One of my things my parents told me was, choose my friends wisely. As I was growing up, that was one of the biggest things I used to hear, because, you'd hang out with the, certain kids on your block. As a kid, you don't really think about who you're hanging out with. You just see them as a kid, and it's just playing with you, and you're doing stuff together, and you're riding your bike, and you're creating mischief in your own little way. But your parents see things a little bit differently, right? They can see this other kid that you're playing with in a really different light, maybe based on their own experiences of people with similar backgrounds or similar personalities as this kid that you're playing with, right? And they can kind of see where that might take you later in life, right? So, my parents would tell me this about schools, like pick your friends wisely in school, pick your friends wisely in life, pick your friends wisely in business, and those are the people that are gonna eventually teach you your morals. Because again, like we said in the last episode, I think you said it, was the top 5 people you hang out with are the top 5 people you end up being like. So those are the same people that are going to teach you the morals, right? So these are things that my parents also told me, is like, find that and whatnot.
Such a great principle. Something I don't know if my parents talked about it in that specific way, but it's true. It's very powerful. It's very empowering to think about things that way. Choosing wisely, I guess, certainly in the context of like alcohol, drugs, hanging out with the wrong crowd, that kind of thing. I do seem to recall learning some things that way.
That's a great thing I think your parents taught you, because again, same thing, right? If you chose to be a smoker, what would happen to you?
Yeah, I guess, maybe it's a fast track to death.
Right, it can be,
or
right?
cancer or whatever.
Right, and if you had chosen to follow the kid that smokes, that could have been your thing. And you may have, if the kid that was smoking got into something a little different, you may have tried it because that again is your friend. And friends are the most easiest people to connect to. Those are the people that also, show you who you can be in a positive or negative way as well, right?
So true. Yeah. I'll get into my point here about chivalry. That's something that my mom definitely taught me. And it's really a reflection of how she wanted to be treated ultimately. But she was teaching me to treat all women that way too. And she was training me all along to think about, opening doors or standing up when a woman comes into the room and things like that. There are some things I've since learned, like, people often confuse. So like with chivalry, the man's not supposed to go into the elevator after the woman. He's supposed to go in first to check and make sure there's no danger, and then welcome the woman in. So those are some of the things. I know it's very like intellectual. Just forgive me because I'm very brainy, but like those are some of the things people sometimes get wrong about chivalry.
So you're saying the idea of ladies first is not necessarily correct.
It's not true in every situation. Certainly opening doors for women, absolutely. But there are also situations like walking down the street. I think this one's common sense. Everybody knows the man is supposed to walk closest to the curb and the woman on the inside of the curb in case a car jumps the curb. That one's fairly common sense. But there are actually non-common sense, like the one I just mentioned, the aspects to chivalry, like when going into an elevator. That seems like it would just be the same rules as going through a door, right? But it's not. You would go in first as a man to make sure there's no danger, and if somebody would get hurt first, you'd be the one. So I know in our quote-unquote enlightened society, I guess chivalry is not as popular as it used to be, but it's certainly something that my ex appreciated about me.
Well, for sure, right? And I mean, I think any good person or any good, human being wants to show appreciation to other, men or women, right? So there's no reason just to be chivalrous towards one particular sex. There's nothing wrong with opening a door for another man.
Absolutely.
And saying, you know what, please go through first. There's nothing wrong with it, right? I think the idea of it is, in that case, is definitely got geared more towards women, for men to be polite to women and respect women and show them that, that we are there for them, that we appreciate them, right? But I remember taking a course.
It's a good way of looking at it.
Yeah, I remember taking a course in Mont Royal there, in Mont Royal College when I went there before it became a university. But that was one of the things that I learned in one of the classes I took. And again, I always wondered, is it dead? How many people do you see doing these things, right? I mean, more and more, I think with the woman power movement, it's moved the women forward first. We're just as good, right? So men, I think, tend to forget sometimes that we still need to open doors for our ladies and our women and our wives and the people that we want to court, right? And even if it's another man, I don't judge anybody on their sexual orientation. And if you have another man in your life, or if you have another woman in your life and you're a woman, that's okay. And if you want to open that door for each other, and that's kind of what I meant, right? It's that I don't think it has a sexual orientation on it. I think it should have a respect orientation on it, right? And I love that concept that your parents taught you, because it's not something that is taught as much anymore. I think especially more and more now with social media, you don't see those things. You see more people laughing at somebody holding a door open for if I held the door open for somebody, someone might laugh at me. It's like, look at this, whipped guy over there, right? He's whipped. He's doing this for his woman. She should be this. It's that reverse empowerment, right? I'm actually being empowered by my wife when I open a door. And I think that's what your dad taught you by the visuals of you seeing him open the door for your mom, right? The more he did for her, the more they got closer in their relationship, and they brought more to that relationship, I think, as well, and as they continued forward into it.
That could be. Yeah, and then the one downside that maybe I learned from the whole chivalry thing was like I'm melancholy personality, introverted, sensitive, intuitive, all those kinds of things. So for me sometimes it was like this bad habit of just putting myself last in everything that I did and not just in aspects of treating someone well. So that was the one downside to it, but recognizing that is like an important stepping stone for me to, well, this whole thing's pretty therapeutic. So
For sure, and there's nothing wrong, to be honest, man. I love the idea of being kind of old school and having the wisdom. And there's those dogs that we're talking about. You might be able to hear them now. But, it's being kind of old school and having that old wisdom within yourself. And I think it's connecting to something that, people aren't connecting to anymore, right? I think it is connecting to a place within us that just wants to see our significant others happy, right? Because we're doing things for them.
Absolutely. Yeah, I learned to do a lot of things for other people through that too. So it's very interesting. I mean, it's caused some imbalance, but that's for me to figure out and to work on. So those are some really great points, Mav. What do you got next?
Awesome. So, one of the things I learned from my parents was about money as well. And, because they had their own businesses, my dad came in 75 to Canada. My mom came in, I believe, 77, if I remember correctly, had me in 78. And, they had their own business by that time. I mentioned in previous episodes that they had purchased a home and they had started an investment property. So they really taught me about money and trying to build something, right? You'll see immigrants in this country and in the US that, they come from countries where they don't have any money and they come here and they build wealth. And that's kind of the thing, one of the things they taught me about money is like, go and work hard for it and it will come to you. But one of the things they taught me within that concept of working hard for your money was that the money that I made when I grew up was not my money. And it's an odd concept to think about. I work 40 hours a week to make money and put it in my bank account, and that's really not my money. It's their money as well. It's family money. So all the money that my sister was making, my dad and my mom were making, was a combined net income for the whole house. It's kind of like we would help each other. So if my dad said, hey, I need to go buy a car, I don't have enough money, or I don't want to use the money I have right now because I have it for something else, and he would need to take something from me, I would give it to him. He would give it to me, so why would I not give it to him? He helped me buy my first car. It was family money that bought my first car. I paid him the money back right away as quickly as I could, but because that's how I felt as a man, to be, as a responsible human being, as a man, not to take advantage of my parents, but putting that money back into the family where that money belongs, right? If I grew up under their household, then I wanted to be a contributor, right? And I think that might come from their upbringing in India, right? I mean, they have a family, it's close-knit, they're tight together, and everything is shared. All the responsibilities are shared. So I think that was one of the things they learned and taught about money to me and my sister. And even to this day, this is exactly how we live with the money. Even though I don't live in the same house as my parents, my sister doesn't anymore, but we still act that way. As if my dad ever says, hey, I need you to pay this bill for me, absolutely, that bill is getting paid. Because in the end, what they taught us was that the family money that we have today would be the same money that they pass on when they pass on to my sister and myself. So the wealth that they created with our help as well as their own, hard work would eventually be passed on generationally.
That's really interesting and not really something that I've heard of before, but I love that too. Just you're thinking about how to spend your money wisely and use it wisely as a tool within your family. So that's really cool. I think some of the things that I learned about money early on was just like responsibility. My mom helped me get signed up for a bank account when I was still pretty young because, we had a pretty big inheritance from my dad passing on. So then I became an earlier overseer and manager of that inheritance. Not all of it. My grandpa was looking after the investment side of it, but I had some playroom, obviously. And, another aspect to that was just that my mom charged both myself and my sister rent. So then we had that responsibility very early on of paying rent to my mom.
Right. And do you mind me asking what she did with the rent money, David?
I'm not sure.
Okay, that's fair. And the only reason I ask is not in a mean way or anything, because I know I've heard of where families and parents will, say for example, collect $100 or $300 or $400 in rent each month, and they'll take that same money and put it aside and put it into a bank account. Now I know your mom being a single mom at that time, I'm assuming she was single at that time.
Yeah.
And not had moved on after that, but was able to maybe then use that money for household expenses, right? So in reality, I think she kind of taught you the same thing, that your money was family money.
Yeah.
If you look at it that way, she just put a title of rent on it. You know what I mean? I put that in quotations, but I think she would have still let you live in the same home without you paying rent, if I'm correct.
Well, certainly if we didn't have that inheritance, I don't think we would have been charged it in the first place. But that's a whole other, maybe, because knowing my dad, he would have charged us rent.
Right, fair enough. And again, I know, and it may have been, again, like you said, a way to teach responsibility, right? And teach you how, that the real world is out there, because, I've come and I've seen this with my own friends. They hit 18 years old, and they're out the door at their family's place, and they're, renting their own places, or they're looking to buy right away something. And, and sometimes that's what parents feel is the responsibility of theirs, is to get their kids to 18 in school or out of school, and move them on into the real world. And a lot of parents feel that they've done their job once they've done that, and there's nothing wrong in that way of thinking or teaching, because that's a lot of times what their parents did for them. It got them to 18 and made them responsible. And we do see lots and lots of millionaires, business owners that have gone through that and have made huge differences in this world, because they had their parents push them out into beyond their comfort zone, and go into the world and start creating something, because now they had to find a way to be responsible, to live, to create money for their family, and maybe their wife or kids if they had any as well at those younger ages.
Yes, absolutely. I love that perspective. I'm going to talk now a little bit about, well, I guess this is kind of a cultural thing in a way. It's kind of fun too. This is something my dad always said. You need a car in Canada. To kind of understand this properly is, we lived in Japan, and I guess I'm assuming my dad must have had some other international exposure as well. But like somewhere like Japan and even Germany, the public transit system is so good, and the roads are have so much traffic on them, then it's not worth taking. Like, it's almost better to walk, take a train, take a bus, do a combination thereof. You get some exercise. It takes a little longer to get around, but still very efficient and very fast. So probably even compared to owning a car in a place like Japan, which might have certain advantages, but it was almost like a status symbol if you owned it and didn't even always use it. If you live in Canada, though, like, we're so spread out. Calgary is a city that suffers from urban sprawl. It might be a concept that's foreign to some people listening to this, but the whole thing is we have, 1.5 million people or something like that, maybe a little less, maybe a little more, spread out over a huge amount of land. You could have it a little more condensed, a little more packed in by building up, and we're finally starting to build up in some areas of Calgary, but we kept building out to the point where, driving across town could be 45 minutes, an hour, maybe longer, depending on where you're trying to get to.
No, you make a good point. It's funny. One of the things I heard, and I don't know how true this is, but I've heard that Calgary has the same square footage of New York. Have you heard that before?
I haven't, but that sounds about right.
Yeah, I've heard that they have the same square footage, but we have obviously a tenth or even less of the population, right? So you're right. It is something to say how we've grown outwards and not upwards.
Yeah.
And I think any successful city, Calgary is a very successful city, but that's, I think, part of the thinking now is to start building upwards, because how much further out can you keep building before you start running into different towns and different other people's, ranches or farmland or whatnot, and then you start gobbling all that up too, right? So the idea of having more condos, something we cover as well on our episode 3 as well, with our purchasing home as well, right? So part of that is you're going to go into getting condos and whatnot too. So You're right, but I just thought I'd kind of throw that in there with the idea of how big Calgary was and comparative to other places.
Yeah, and it's also this whole idea of like I have family and friends within like a 4 hour radius of Calgary, so they're also spread out. So how do you get there without a car? I mean, you can take a Greyhound bus or something like that, but gosh, I mean, most of us just kind of shake our heads at the thought or cringe at the thought because of how much time that might take, or doing an overnight bus trip, or spending time next to somebody you don't really want to sit next to for however long, just to get to where you want to go. So it's much harder here. We don't have public transit to the extent that some countries do, and it's not. I mean, some people might pipe in about pollution or greenhouse emissions. I mean, if you look at Calgary or Canada in general, you'll see that we have a pretty clean country overall.
No, for sure. And that's actually a very interesting perspective that your dad taught you was you need a car in Canada, right? I don't think my parents ever brought that up. For me, I think, and I'm thinking about it, I think it was almost like a given that you needed a car. I don't think it was ever even mentioned or even talked about. I think, growing up in North America, it's almost a thing where you're entitled to having a car, that you have that entitlement feeling, right, of having a car. So, some people will buy a car that's super expensive and some people won't, which is either way is fine. Doesn't really matter. Whatever your finances allow you to do, you should do, and then make the right choices for you, right? But I don't think that was really ever taught. So to me, that's a pretty interesting idea, because when I think about it, it's very true, right? In order to get around anywhere nowadays, especially if you're in the city, you want to go to work, especially if you're working that 9 to 5 type job, you need a car typically. Or if you're taking the bus, it does take a lot more time to get around, right? We have a C train, something that people may be familiar with. It's just, or may not be, right? It's just kind of like a above ground subway system, right? Versus an underground subway system. So, but that's something we have as well, right? So, but those things take time to get around, right? And so do cars. And I think you bring up a great idea as well about the greenhouse emissions as well, right? That cars can create, or even other forms of transportation can create, right? But that's a very interesting concept. And I think, with the ability to have a vehicle, it allows you, like you said, to leave on different trips. I can go into BC, or I can go into the US, or anywhere I want to go. God forbid, I don't know quite why I'd want to drive in Saskatchewan, but you know what, maybe one day I'll find a reason to go into Saskatchewan. And
I did as a band.
There you go. And I've heard they have Great Lakes, so I'm not saying anything bad against the area. Just right now I have no reason to, right? But I've heard they have Great Lakes out there, great boating out there. So maybe one day I can take my car out there and really find out what the province is about, right? But
so true.
Yeah, but I think it allows you to do different things, which is an amazing thing, because I've never really thought of a car in that way. I think I've known about it, but until you've said that's what your parents taught you, that's kind of neat.
Yeah, it's really interesting. What do you got next for us, Mav?
One of the things I think I learned from my parents was just kind of not something they told me. It was something I kind of watched them do when I was growing up. So One of the things I saw was that they worked hard. They had their own business. They worked very hard. They worked smart. And sometimes they made bad choices in the business, right? And that's what happens in business. Sometimes you make good choices and bad choices, and you deal with the consequences of those choices, right? I mean,
so true.
Especially if you've never done business in Canada, coming from another country, you may not understand how to do business with people in this country, right? And people in Canada may take advantage of you when you are a newcomer to this country, when you want to do business with them, right? So, there's things that you learn. These are different conversations we can get into as well. But one of the things, again, I learned from was taking chances, right? And growing up now and watching those principles that they had in place allows me to see the things now that my parents say to me. Like my mom will always say to me, go do what you want to do, be successful in what you want to be successful in, and you have our support regardless of if you fail or not. So they're showing me and telling me it doesn't matter, go take a chance, go work for what I want in life and what anybody wants in life, right? I think that's one thing I find is really neat. They have the support system there, and if I was to fail, that I could always lean back on my parents. So that's one of the things I've always been able to watch them when I was a kid, and now have them say to me as I'm growing up and pursuing different venues of different ways to make money and different business ventures that we're looking to put together over the next year or 2 years here. But it's just kind of neat to see that, I always know that if I ever fail, I got my wife behind me. My wife has my mom and my dad, which is our parents. We have my mother-in-law, we have my sister, we have all this tight group knit of family. That's just the immediate family, and that's not even saying how many friends we have and other, second family members like cousins and whatnot that would come in and help us too if anything ever happened, right? But I think that's all began right with that family circle.
That's another really amazing principle as well. I don't think we're often taught to take risks in the average household, or maybe we are in some ways, but there's so much negativity associated with risk a lot of the time. Feelings of anxiety or feelings of fear, or this might not work out, and so a lot of people tend to play it safe. But I like that, a culture of risk taking.
Right. Well, it's the same thing, right? I mean, if you're a business, you have your own business right now. You've been podcasting, blogging, and you do the same thing. You write for other publications as well, and and I think that is all about risk taking and business risk as well, right? Because you're going out there, and it may not be something that your parents taught you; it's maybe something you learned yourself. But I think the idea of watching your parents, if you put some thought into it, you'd probably see that they took a risk coming to this country, talking to our speakers, or talking to yourself, David, as well. That you can see that they took a risk by going to a different country and taking their kids with them. That's a huge risk. And when you start thinking about the risks that they took and the things that they taught you, saying, you know what, we moved, my parents taught me the same thing. They moved from another country to Canada. Your parents left Canada and moved to a different country. There's a huge risk involved with that, not knowing what's going to come next. And I think when we look at it and explore that with our own thoughts and time of reflection, we can really see how can you fail learning those principles from your parents, because they didn't fail. They took the right steps. Maybe they fell upon hard times. Well, that's a different thing, but they kept going. They kept working hard and smart. And I know my parents went through bankruptcies and whatnot, but they always found a way to put food on our table, and that, me and my sister, how to be stronger, right? Just like your parents, and I'm going to go into this, and I apologize if I say something, over the line, but I think even through when your dad passed away, I think you had the ability to learn from that as well, and what it takes and the risk that your mom had to take to now raise her own 2 kids, right? And the things that she had to do and get stronger and be stronger, so then you guys could turn out stronger.
Well, people have even said to me things like, you live a fairly unique life. Well, something like podcasting and blogging is perfect for being able to share that with others. Like, maybe I do live an interesting life. I don't know, but it's just kind of what I've always done. It was like what was written on my heart before I was even born, in a way, is like what I was meant to do. Still finding that thing in a way too, but I think, I'm headed in that direction. So that's great. And I'm going to tie that in with this thing of work ethic. A lot of people sort of that get to know me attribute that partly to my Asian upbringing in Japan. Sure, I totally could see that, because I think there's this idea of like shadow work in Japan, where people will put in a ton of effort behind the scenes, but you won't see it out front. You'll see it in some ways, like, if a lot of Japanese take pride in their health and their appearance. So you will see that manifested, but you don't see the effort that's gone into getting there. Whereas we in North America like to brag about it. You talked about Instagram, I think, last episode, and how people just want to show off their bodies on Instagram. We're bragging about it, but Japan's not really like that. This shadow work, all this effort that goes in behind the scenes, still, I think it does need to be rewarded, but it sort of comes down from this idea that Tim Ferriss has expressed as well, where like if a nail sticks up, it's pounded down. You're supposed to conform. There's supposed to be unity within Japan. There's supposed to be community within Japan. So it leans a little bit more in that direction culturally as well as politically. But work ethic, yes, learned from Japan also, but my dad was such a huge influence in that too. And he was doing he was doing videos. I think he sent over 100 back to Canada in the time that we were living in Japan to both his parents as well as my mom's parents. So my grandparents received, dozens of videos, homemade videos that he created. He would record random Japanese TV shows or commercials, and he would also record, us having Christmas or just some thoughts. He would always, I think begin and end videos with just like a monologue, sharing about what was going on and what was happening and what he was thinking. He would set up the family website. So like this is the super early days of the internet, and he'd already set up a family website, which at the time would have been pretty unusual. He practiced the trumpet. He would engage in tons of study in Bibles and theology, in belief systems and religion. So a huge part of what I've carried forward, my fascination with computers. Oh, I guess my dad even had a book partially written and not published or something like that too. But my fascination with a lot of those things came from that as well, from observing him. I wasn't like him, so I don't think he liked that much about me. But in time I found my way.
Well, it's funny you say that about the work ethic of your dad, and a lot of things that I pick up you're saying are a lot of the things I see in your work ethic and the wanted to, learning different instruments, maybe not the trumpet so much, but you've
not
learned
the trumpet, yeah,
lots of different instruments, and writing a book, and I know you've put out a book and you're working on your second book here, and,
yep.
Recording, and you record yourself and he was recording, and you guys both have the similarity of websites and getting information to people. His more was on the family end of things, and, you're looking to get information to a community, right? Just like I am. We're looking to build that community, which is in essence a family. So if you look at it, his work ethic to me looks very similar to the work ethic you put in, and I see like huge principles in what you learned in work ethic being applied back to yourself, right? So,
it's very true.
Yeah, and it's funny, I'm thinking about this, and I apologize if I say this wrongly, but I would have actually loved to meet your dad, because I would love to see his personality and what your personality is like, and really get a feel for how similar or different you guys really were, because I feel just from everything you've said is that you carry a huge legacy of who he is probably within you, and you probably don't even know about it. So I think that's one of the things that maybe you took away from the things that you've learned from your dad without even maybe knowing it. So if I can say that, I hope it's okay.
Yeah, sure. No, I think that's great. I don't think we were actually all that similar, believe it or not. I loved sports. He wasn't really into them. I actively went out and played and watched them. He probably wouldn't watch or play sports, even though my uncles were kind of more into that. So his brothers would have been more into that, but maybe in other ways that were hard to see, we'd be similar too. So I can I can definitely see the dissimilarities, but similarities, sure.
Absolutely. And, and one of the cool things is, with work ethic, that's one thing I learned from my parents as well. I think all the things that we've talked about, especially work ethic, is something that everybody will learn from a parent or a guardian or even a teacher in school, right? I mean, sometimes the best parent sometimes is the teacher, because sometimes, as we know, a lot of times now people aren't growing up with parents in the household. Unfortunately, parents are spending a lot of time at work and don't have the time to give back to their kids, right? So their kids have to find different ways, right? And other people's work ethic is stronger, right? Especially, I know on our last podcast, we're talking about, different podcasters that you can learn from as well, right? And that's work ethics that you can take from, if there's nobody at home, right? I know I don't always necessarily look up to my parents as my mentors. I do have other people, in sports, for example. My parents don't play sports anymore. My mom used to be a track and field girl, but she's not into that anymore, right? She's not into running anymore. She's in her 60s now, and that's just not her lifestyle, right? But my dad wasn't a sports watcher growing up, right? When we were growing up, he was more focused on the work ethic of getting his business going, right? Which allowed us me and my sister, when I say us, to grow up and enjoy sports like basketball. And, we grew up in the era watching Michael Jordan play and Larry Bird and some of Magic Johnson, not a lot, but we got to watch some of the best players in that era play. And now we've been able to also watch some of the best players in this era play, because these are the things that his work ethic allowed us to enjoy, right? So I think there's something to be said about your parents' work ethic and what it allows you to enjoy, the freedom it allows you to enjoy as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we're on to our last couple of points. So Maveen, you want to start us off?
So the other one I got was owning your own business. The reason I say this is one of the things I learned from my parents. It's funny. Probably about 3 months ago now, there was a commercial on TV that I saw. I think it was by the Royal Bank, and it was during the Olympics. And they had shown this girl. She's going back to her home country, which happened to be India. And then she was going back to their home that had grown up in the commercial. And and she goes through all the struggle that her parents had gone through to where she is now. And it made me think back to the same struggle, because again, it was an easy connecting point. My parents came from India. So it was easy for me to connect to that commercial and really think about all the things that my parents had done. And the first thing they had learned from their parents was to have their own business, because both my granddads had their own business back in India. And one of the things I learned was when they came here, they started their own business here in Canada. So one of the things I thought about was, I've always been taught in school to go to school and get a job, but never was it to get an education. Right? And then start my own business. It was always get an education to work for somebody else. So that's one of the things that I learned from them, just by, again, watching them, not necessarily something they sat me down and told me about, but really seeing that they had their own business, right? And that's what they pursued. They didn't really go work for somebody else and let them control. They controlled the amount of time they put into their own business and the effort they put in, and even the results they got from it, good or bad, because there was a lot of bad results and there was a lot of good results, right? So that's one of the things I learned from my parents, and that's kind of where I am in my life now. It's really focus on having my own business and really progressing that forward in life as well, right? And if it means working for somebody else, absolutely I would do that, potentially as a consultant now versus as an employee. And if it means I have to go back to being an employee, I'm not going to let my ego stop me. I would go back as an employee for anybody, but as long as I can take something from it and then put that back into the idea of owning my own business, absolutely.
It's another really fantastic principle, and I can totally see that drive in you as well. Like, you're the one, I mean, I want to get this podcast out too, just as much as you do, but you're the one to say, hey, are we recording? Are we recording? Are we going to record today? Yeah. You're texting me. Yeah. Can we record? Now's the time to record, man.
Yeah, I know. Sometimes I forget you got other stuff to do, and I know you got your own business as well, and you got to make sure that business is running smoothly and all the things are done in that business before me and you can get together, because right now, this is not a monetary business venture for you, right? It's not a monetary business venture for me. Right now, what we're doing is really just putting on information and seeing what people think, and really just trying to spread the word and get this idea out to the masses that, there's so many great things around you that if you just take a minute to realize it, you'll see all the goodness within yourself that potentially your parents have put into you, or some other sort of guardian, or even musician has put into you. We don't have to limit this to parents. In this episode, I know we are, and potentially down the road we'll also look at maybe 10 musicians who've influenced you, and maybe we'll look at
that'd be cool.
10 actors, and maybe we'll look at 10 books, and but in this particular way, I think it's just really a cool way of looking at it, right? And I'm going to keep messaging you every day and saying, hey, let's record. And the idea, my ultimate goal one day would be so we can start recording 2, 3, 4 times and putting out 3, 4, 5 episodes a week, right? Because and giving people something to really think about. But I mean, only our listeners can tell us if that's what they want.
Absolutely. And I totally see the potential for it. I think we have good chemistry on the mics, and I think there's good potential for traffic to our individual products, and websites. And I think there's already been some good comments about the show as well. So I think, we're always looking to expand that and grow that, but it's cool to see that initial traction of the project that we're working on together as well. I'll get into my last point, and I think this occurred about 10 years ago now. I want to say 2007. It was kind of my first time down to Oregon, and not California, because I'd been to California before, but it was sort of a vacation of sorts with my mom and my stepdad. So we were going to drive down to California, where some of my stepdad's kids are, and for graduation and a few other things like that. So we'd driven all the way through like Idaho, and we stopped in Sandpoint. My mom noticed that it was a cool place, hip place, happening place for like music. Like pretty much every bar there has live music. And this is pretty cool. And so I was like, this place is pretty cool. And she's like, yeah, like she knowingly, right? So we stopped in Sandpoint. We stopped in Ritzville. It's a kind of a small place in Washington, I'm pretty sure. And we had, of all things, Mexican food there. It's quite good.
There you go.
and then we proceeded down to Portland. So, there's a whole lot of nothing for a while on that road. If you've made that trip, maybe Mav, you've made it down too because of network marketing to Portland. But
we've driven out to Portland. I honestly can't remember the whole drive, to be honest. But yeah, I have been down to Portland for a network marketing event.
There you go. Yeah, so like it was springtime, I guess probably about May or June. So Portland, it's rainy, so everything is green. It's just amazing, incredible. And first time seeing Columbian River Gorge and Mount Hood together, and there's just nothing like it. I mean, we do have some amazing things here in Alberta too, like the Hoodoo or the rivers and various sites in the mountains too, but like this was nothing like I'd seen before, and that was pretty incredible too. But eventually we made our way down to California, and I think we'd attended at a church at the Crystal Cathedral. It's a very famous landmark at this point. I don't know if I'm assuming it's still standing, but I think they were having some financial troubles at that church recently, and I think Robert Schuller passed away not long ago as well. But we went to lunch afterwards, and I'd kind of broken down, and they were like, "What's wrong?" And there was a bunch of things, but I just felt like as the reality was dawning on me that like no matter where you travel, even though like you might be feeling like a different person for a while, really you just take yourself with you. Derek Sivers had that comment before on the podcast, and I totally resonate with that. You just take yourself, your habits, your beliefs, everything with you wherever you go, even though it might be new and different and like paradigm shifting for a while. Eventually you settle in and you just be yourself again. And that was kind of hitting me. So I was just kind of disillusioned about, I don't feel like I'm connecting with my generation and making friends, and I feel like I'm kind of alone in this whole thing. And so I shared that, as difficult as it was, along with some other things, just like family issues and whatnot, with my mom and my stepdad. And one of the things my mom said was, a burden shared is a burden halved. So I've definitely taken that with me ever since. Just that, you might be hurting, you might have a lot of pain, there might be something going on the inside that you don't know what to do with. But if you share it with someone that you trust and somebody that cares for you, then there's an opportunity for that burden to be lessened. And that's just an amazing thing.
Wow, that's an amazing story, actually. I wasn't sure you were going to get into that, so that's kind of cool. And I think that is a huge lesson that your mom shared with you. And, I think having the ability to talk to people is huge, right? And I think, and that's kind of the thing that people do nowadays, unfortunately, is not talk to the people that they need to talk to help them get through stuff, or they go on, some sort of pharmaceutical and
right.
they're taught to just deal with the problem that way, right? But I think sometimes just talking to other people can make such a huge difference. And I know and this is one thing I know we've done, is we've had conversations. I've had conversations with other friends as well. I have a buddy in Thailand, and me and him will talk as well. And, we'll just kind of go through our life, and it's kind of neat. He's in his, I believe he's about 47, and I'm sorry if I guess your age wrong, Shannon, don't kill me. But, he's a great I have a great respect for him, because I can kind of see where he's taken his life. I can really see how I'm modeling my life, and I can really see how, we're exactly the same. We have the same tendencies, and we worry about the same things, and we go through the same process. We're almost like really are like brothers, in reality. I do feel that, and but having those conversations with somebody like that allows you to really understand yourself better, and or just release that tension that you've been holding on the inside, right? Because a lot of reasons I think a lot of people go on pharmaceuticals is to deal with their stuff, is because they keep all this stuff on the inside. It's bottling up, it's eating away at them, it's making them sicker. And well, how do you cure someone that's sick? Give them medicine. So if people were just talk and get that out of their system, I think that is a huge advice your mom gave you, which I'm gonna take to heart and learn from as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's something to be said about the poison that stays in your body and how to get that out. But there's also something to be said about the poison that stays in your mind, and you let that fester and continue to grow. Well, law of attraction says whatever you focus on grows. So that's something to be addressed and considered as well.
Right. So, just kind of wrapping this up, what are some of your final thoughts here on the things you learned from your parents?
I think this has been such a cool episode, and I just hope it's like as cool of an experience for everyone listening as it has been for us, that you'll realize some lessons you've learned from your parents that you'll think fondly of, even if your parent wasn't the best parent. And we know that bad things can happen in this world. It's just the way things are. But hopefully you'll think about some of the positive things that you've learned from them, or how you can turn around those negatives and make them into positives.
Right. And, and I want to leave off with that as an example too, right? I mean, we all know Oprah Winfrey and some of the stuff that she went through and growing up as a child, and look where she is now, right? She turned that negative experience growing up into something positive. I know she said on many occasions that the negative experiences she grew up experiencing made her who she is today. She's the type of person she is today because of all the, the molestation that took place when she was younger, but now she understands that because she went through that, she has a better understanding of how other people go through that. She's able to help other people through different shows that she's done, different events that she's done, the places that she invests her money and to give to charity and all that stuff, right? So all those experiences that she went through made her into who she is. If she hadn't gone through that experience, I wonder if that's who she would be today.
Yeah, very true. Your experiences form who you are, but she was somebody that took what was negative and turned it around. So, and she's also interviewed many people of the same. So those might be a few things worth exploring as well. Well, this has been Using Your Power. We're at usingyourpower.com. We look forward to answering all of your comments.
Thank you so much.